Chapter 5 of The Web of Indian Life by Sister Nivedita, Margaret E. Noble. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 5. The Place of Women in the National Life. As the light of dawn breaks on the long curving street of the Indian village, the chance passer-by will see at every door some kneeling woman, busied with the ceremony of the salutation of the threshold. A pattern drawn on the pavement, in lines of powdered rice, with flowers arranged at regular points within it, remains for a few hours to mark the fact that cleansing and worship have been performed. The joy of home finds silent expression in the artistic zest of the design. Wealth or poverty betrays itself, according as the flowers are a bright network of neuter-gourd blossoms, a stiff little row of 2 or 3 white daisies, or some other offering, more or less humble, as the case may be. But everywhere we read a habit of thought, to which all things are symbolic, the air upon the doorstep full of dim boding and suggestiveness as to the incomings and outgoings which the day shall witness, and the morning opening and setting wide the door, an act held to be no way safe unless done by one who will brood in doing it upon the divine security and benediction of her beloved. Such thought was the fashion of a very ancient world, the world in which myths were born, out of which religions issued, and wherein our vague and mysterious ideas of luck originated. The custom bears its age upon its brow. For thousands of years must Indian women have risen with the light to perform the salutation of the threshold. Thousands of years of simplicity and patience, like that of a peasant, like that of the grass, speak in the beautiful rite. It is this patience of women that makes civilizations. It is this patience of the Indian woman, with this her mingling of large power of reverie, that has made and makes the Indian nationality. On its ideal side, the life of an Indian woman is a poem of the Indian soil. For all that coherence and social unity which the West has lost within the last few centuries remains still in the Orient intact. Eastern life is an organic whole, not only as regards the connectedness of its parts amongst themselves, but also in the larger matter of their common relation to place. Even in the city, the routine of a Hindu home is an unbroken reminiscence of an ancestral village. Orthodox life is simply rural life maintained unmodified under adverse conditions. Perhaps this is nowhere more strikingly illustrated than in all that concerns the place of the cow in domestic life. Journeying over the country, the eye learns to look to the grazing lands in order to gauge the prosperity of districts. For in climates which horses support with difficulty, the patient bullock is the friend of agriculture, and without his aid the fields could not be kept under the plow. Thus the Aryan and the cow between them have made India what she is, and never does the peasant forget the fact. 5,000 years of love and gratitude have been sufficient, on the other hand, to humanize the quadruped, and the soft eyes of the gentle beast, as we see it in this eastern land, look out on us with a satisfied conviction of kinship and mutual trust, for which the Western barbarian is but little prepared. Its breeds and sizes are almost innumerable. Benares, and the rich mercantile quarters of northern cities, maintain the lordly Sivas bulls, who come and go about the streets, eating from what shop front or stall they choose, entirely unmolested. The South, again, possesses a kind of bullock little larger than a Newfoundland dog, which is nevertheless strong enough to draw a cart containing a couple of men, and perhaps there are no beasts of draught in the world finer than the Mysore bullocks. But almost all Indian cattle are smaller than their western compeers, and all are characterized by a prominent hump, in front of which the yoke is placed. It is no wonder that the life of the cow has so large a place in that scheme of the national well-being which we call Hinduism. Who has realized the ages that it must have taken to stock the country with the necessary numbers, ages in which the destruction of one life so precious, under the weight of hunger, would be an irredeemable crime against society? It is only natural that the poetry of the people should find in these animals one of its central motives, for all that domestic affection which we spend on the dog and cat, making of such dumb creatures actual comrades and hearthside friends, is here lavished on them. Even in the towns where the stones of the courtyard are the sole pasture, they are kept, and in the huts of the poor the room occupied by the milk-giver is to the full as good as that of any of the family. We find it difficult in the North to distinguish the natural festivals of fruit gathering and harvest home from purely religious rites. There is the exaltation of feeling and imagination, and a closeness to the powers of nature, in the one case as in the other, which forms a link between them. The occasion of receiving a new cow into a Hindu family is tinged with a like sentiment. The whole household turns out to welcome the incoming member, who is decorated with flowers and fed daintily as soon as she enters the gates of the dwelling, while endearments are lavished on her in the effort to make her accept the strange abode as home. The psychology of this is not purely self-interested, as when we butter the cat's paws that she may never be happy at a distance from our hearth. There is a habitual, almost an instinctive recognition in India of the fact that mind is the controlling element in life, and it has become a second nature with them to appeal directly to it. Even in the case of what we are pleased to term the lower animals, it requires no argument to show a Hindu that the cow will maintain her health and perform all her functions better if her feeling goes with, instead of against, her new environment. The fact is self-evident to him, and in the ceremony of welcome, the intrusion of any violent thought or emotion upon the family circle would be earnestly deprecated, and every effort put forth to hold the mental atmosphere in gentleness and calm. This way of looking at things finds striking illustration in the education of girls, for throughout a woman's life the cow is to be her constant companion. It is important, therefore, that she be duly equipped with the knowledge of its management and treatment. This necessity is expressed in folk form by the statement that few families are blessed with good fortune in the three matters of children, of money, and of milk. Even if the home be full of the laughter of little voices, and if there be money enough to feed them, is not the milk apt to turn sour, or the cow to run dry? It is essential, then, to choose brides for our sons who have a lucky hand with the cow, and to attain the lucky hand, little girls are made to rise at 5 o'clock in the mornings, and to sit for an hour or more before her, hanging garlands on her neck, offering flowers at her feet, giving her delectable things to eat, and repeating texts and verses full of the expression of reverence and gratitude. And indeed, there is no end to the household debt. Milk is the only food, said the Hindu, that is the product of love. Probably for this reason, in a country where so much thought is given to the mental effects of what is eaten, it is the favorite, being held with fruit and honey, to be fit nourishment for the saints. But fuel and medicine are also provided by the bovine mother. Cow dung is held to have antiseptic and purifying properties, and to spread it with her own hands, making the mud floor damp-proof, and giving it the breath ever fragrant to the peasant, would be thought no more disgraceful to the princess fallen upon evil days of poverty than to the humbler daughter of any poor but well-descended house. From the Punjab to Cape Comorin, evenfall, the who is it moment of Japan, and the yellow dust hour of China, is known as the time of cow dust, recalling in a word the picture of the village and the herds driven home along the lanes for the night. It is one of the great glories of countries of the Asiatic type, ranking beside their universal recognition of the sacredness of letters, that in them the simple life of the Commonwealth as a whole, and not the artificial and luxurious routine of courts, has always been regarded as the social type. Hence in India, labor, rising into government, stands side by side with prayer and motherhood as the main opportunity of women, and as her integral contribution to the national righteousness. The domestic necessities of pastoral may bear less heavily upon her than those of peasant communities, leaving her more time for the use of the needle. But in Arabia, as in India, the ideal must needs be fulfilled, and Our Lady of the Moslems is loved for the fact that, though the daughter of the Prophet, she turned the millstone with her own delicate hands, and toiled in frugal household ways for the good of those dependent on her care, almost as much as for the sweet intercession by which she named the salvation of all Mussulmans as the dowry she would claim of God on the Day of Judgment. In India, the cowhouse, the dairy, the kitchen, the granary, the chapel, with numerous other offices, divide the day-long attentions of the ladies of the family. In rich old houses there will be a large cooking room and veranda for the cooks, and in addition not one but a series of kitchens for the use of mother, daughters, and daughters-in-law. And the herb gardens and orchards are accessible only from the zenana. In all these things nothing is more noticeable than the readiness and spontaneity with which work is subdivided, and the peaceful way in which it is carried out. This is most striking with regard to the preparation of food, a service into which the Indian has been taught from childhood to pour a concentrated sweetness of love and hospitality. Perhaps there is no single institution amongst ourselves by which we can convey an idea of the joy it gives the master of the household to see many mouths fed at his cost, or the mistress to feel that she serves them all. Every woman being a cook, and often of great skill, it was in years gone by considered as the highest compliment to receive an invitation from a neighboring family on the occasion of some important festivity, to come and help faire la cuisine. Even Hindu society, however, is affected by the ideals of Western organization, and emergency work nowadays tends more and more to be laid on the shoulders of the Brahmins, imported for that occasion, but not regarded socially as servants, in spite of the fact that they accept a daily wage. There is thus a point of view from which the lives of Indian women may be considered as a vast cooperation of the race to perform necessary labor, dignifying it meanwhile by every association of refinement, tenderness, and self-respect. And it might almost be claimed that the orthodox Hindu household is the only one in the world which combines a high degree of civilization with a complete elimination of any form of domestic slavery. Certainly slavery in Asia, under the regimes of great religious systems, has never meant what Europe and America have made of it. There are still living persons who are bought in their childhood as gulams by Rajput and Bengali families. These were orphans, brought up and educated along with the children of the household, but made useful in minor ways. It never occurred to anyone that when the days of wage earning arrived, the quondam master and mistress had any claim whatsoever upon the emoluments of their dependents, yet they could not be held to have done their duty until they had married and settled them in life appropriately. It is a curious consequence of this humanity of custom that the word slave cannot be made to sting the Asiatic consciousness as it does the European. As one travels through regions not yet exhausted by famine, the signs of Indian peasant happiness become familiar to the eye. The mud homestead, built on its high plinth with deep verandas, decently thatched or tiled, and almost hidden in clusters of coconut palms, bamboos, and plantains, the stretch of green with its grazing cows, or rice fields and mango orchards, the unbroken dome of blue edged off on the horizon by the tremulous line of foliage where new bamboos veil some fresh village or farmhouse. Such is the picture beloved by the Indian heart. Even in the distant cities, every festival day brings back its memory, for the jars of water, with coconuts for lids, and the green shoots of plantain, standing against the pillars, with the garlands of mango leaves above the doorway, are the auspicious and therefore universal decoration. It is her longing for this natural setting of grove, river, and meadow that makes the housewife so contented with the severe architectural form of her home, bidding her seek for no irrelevant decorative detail. The Indian does not live in whom the passion for nature is not conscious and profound, and the marble palaces of Rajputana and the north, in which buildings are made beautiful, instead of having beautiful things put into them, are directly related, through this ideal, to the peasant cottages and farmhouses of Bengal. Indeed, if we would draw the life of an Indian woman truly, it is in a long series of peasant pictures that it must be outlined. Every plant, flower, fruit, in its own season, calls up some historic or poetic association. Under the kadhumba tree, whose blossoms occur in stiff balls like those of our plain, stood Krishna, playing on the flute. In the magnificent shade and coolness of the bow, the tree whose leaves are so delicately poised that they quiver like those of our aspen, even in the stillest noon, Buddha, in the heart of the night, attained nirvana. The soft sirisha flower that can bear the weight of bees, but not of hummingbirds, reminds one of all exquisite and tender things, the lips of a woman, the heart of a child, and so on. The amloki fruit is not only wholesome and delicious for household use, making the work of preserving it an act of merit, but its very name is famous throughout Buddhist Asia, carrying one back to the great age when it was a constant architectural ornament. The fragrance of the mango blossom is one of the 5 arrows of Cupid's bow. The custard apple was the favorite fruit of Sita. Such are a few only of the complex associations that have in the course of the ages accumulated about the common Indian life. No home is so bare that it is not beautified by this wealth of dreams, for it has long ago sunk into the very structure of the language. No caste is so high, nor is any caste so low, as to be beyond its reach. It is an immense national possession, creating mutual sentiment and common memory, offering abundance of material also for the development of individual taste and imagination, and above all, acting as an organic and indestructible bond to attach the Indian mind eternally to its own soil, and in every sense involving permanence of relation, silently and rigorously to exclude the foreigner. Men are of course initiated into their share of this inheritance in infancy. Afterwards, from their study of letters, they may return and refresh the domestic folklore with a greater accuracy. But the women live always in its atmosphere. This is the actuality against whose background their simple pious lives are set, and through them it maintains unabated its volume and continuity. We see thus that the Indian organization of life and society is coherent and necessary, and that its methods and ideals, having sprung directly from their soil, have a stability due to correspondence with their environment, which is inconceivable to persons who are themselves content to be favored members of most favored nations. The social unity, as an individual organism, was expressed in quaint form in the old-time myth that Brahmins sprang from the lips of the Creator, warriors from his arms, the people from his thighs, and the working classes from his feet. But the way in which physical conditions imposed themselves upon the Creator himself in this process could not be recognized by early observers, who had seen nothing outside their own country. The modern student, however, educated by a wide range of geographical impressions, cannot fail to be struck by another feature of the Indian synthesis, its completely organic character in a territorial sense. Every province within the vast boundaries fulfills some necessary part in the completing of a nationality. No one place repeats the specialized function of another, and what is true of the districts holds equally good of the people as a whole, and the women in particular. In the national character we always find a summary of the national history. Of no country is this more true than of India. The Bengali wife worships her husband and serves her children and her household with all the rapt idealism of the saints. The women of Maharashtra are as strong and as actual as any in the West. The Rajpuni queen prides herself on the unflinching courage of her race, that would follow her husband even into the funeral fire, yet would not permit a king to name his wife as amongst his subjects. The woman of Madras struggles with agony to reach the spiritual pole star, building up again and again, like some careful beaver, any fragment of her wall of custom that the resistless tides of the modern world may attempt to break away. And the daughters of Gujarat are, like the women of merchant peoples everywhere, soft and silken and flower-like, dainty and clinging as a dream. Or we may penetrate into the Muslim Zanana, to find the same graceful Indian womanhood, sometimes clad in the sari, sometimes in the short Turkish jacket, but always the selfsame gentle and beautiful wifehood and motherhood, measuring itself in all its doings as much against the standards of religious obligation, and as little against those of fashion, as any of its Hindu compatriots might do. Nor amongst these strong, outstanding types is there any failure of individual achievement. Brunhild herself was not more heroic than the thousands of whom the Rajput chronicles tell. Nay, in the supreme act of her life, the mystic death on the throne of flame beside her dead Zigut, many a quiet little Bengali woman has been her peer. Joan of Arc was not more a patriot than Chand Bibi, or the wonderful Queen of Jhansi who, in the year 1857, fought in person with the British troops. The children of men who saw it talk to this day of the form of this woman's father swinging on the gibbet, high above the city walls, hanging there by her order for the crime of making a treaty with the English to deliver the keys into their hands. They talk too of her swift rush at the head of her troops across the drowsy midday camp, her lance poised to pierce, her bay mare Lakshmi straining every muscle, the whiz of the charge so unexpected that only here and there a dazed white soldier could gather presence of mind to fire a shot at the cavalcade already past. And old men still sing her glory with tears choking the voice. But the Rani of Jhansi, though a queen, was no purdah woman. She was a Maratha with a passion for her country, and practiced from girlhood in the chase. She had been the real heart of the kingdom ever since her marriage, for her father was only a handsome figurehead, who spent in making feeble poetry the time he might have given to rule or to his wife. Her life had been, in fact, as solitary as that of a medieval saint, and her ostensible reason for fighting was the right to adopt an heir. There has always indeed been a great development of the political faculty amongst Maratha women, a development which is by no means lost at the present day. It is well known that long before the Queen of Jhansi, Shivaji owed the inspiration that led to the national reawakening to his mother rather than to his father. If again we desire to hear of the woman of romance, is it not sufficient to cite the name of that empress to whom the Taj Mahal was built? To Hindus, as to Mohammedans, this place of the dead is holy, for to the one as to the other it speaks with silent eloquence of the perfect wife. We may dream as inadequately as we please of the Queen Arjman Banu, crown of the palace, but two things we cannot forget. One is the tender thought of the woman who could detach herself from the very pains of death to assure her husband that she desired a tomb worthy of his love. And the other is the image of the passing Shah Jehan, in the sunset-lighted balcony, with his eyes fixed on the snow-white pile at the bend in the river, and his heart full of consolation of having wrought for her he loved, through the space of 20 years, a work that she surely accepted at the last. The words, even I, am Beatrice, are not more full of the triumphant close of love than this picture of the death of the Mughal emperor. Yet we have to admit that to the Asiatic in general, society does not offer the kingdom of beauty and charm as her sphere. The foster mother of Moses, the mother of Jesus, the wife of the prophet, Khadijah, and his daughter Fatima, are the true exemplars of the Muslim woman. And the ideal achievements of Hindu womanhood are likewise of wisdom and service and renunciation, rather than of power and love. Hindu lyrics of romance are always put into the mouth of Radha, the shepherdess, singing to Krishna, and it is interesting to note how the motive of each lover is placed always in the feeling of the other, and how quickly any departure from this canon would disgust Indian taste. Even Persian poetry, the classic of the Mohammedan, is said by those who know it to have avoided in a wonderful way the use of he and she. Be I the string, the note be thou. Be thou the body, I the life. Let none hereafter say of us that one was I, another thou. Is this spoken between two lovers, or is it entirely of the soul? There is doubtless some truth in the idea that society in a military state tends always to seclude its women. The fact that in the aristocratic strictness of retreat, the Musalmanin ranks first, the Rajpuni second, and the Bengali woman only third in India, goes far to support this conclusion. But the case of the Rani of Jhansi is sufficient indication that the custom is by no means so universal as is often stated. The lower classes move freely in all countries, for household work and the earning of their livelihood compel, and the screen is always more easily lifted for the Hindu than for the Mohammedan. 1,000 considerations intervene to mitigate its severity in the case of the former, while in the South and West, where Muslim rule was brief, and Muslim fashions had little force, it is actually non-existent. By this it is not to be understood that any Hindu women meet men outside their kindred with the freedom and frankness of their Western sisters. Very old adaptations of the Ramayana show us the brother-in-law who has never looked higher than the heroine's feet, and the wife who blushes rather than mention her husband's name. But the power of the individual to isolate himself in the midst of apparently unrestrained social intercourse is necessary in all communities, and has correspondence in Western society itself. Freedom is granted only to the self-disciplined. It might be added that a good wife has little occasion to realize the possible jealousy of her husband in the East as in the West, and that an unreasonable fit of suspicion would be considered the same weakness and insult by the one society as by the other. The liberty of Madras and Bombay is, however, a reality for all its limitations, and in some parts of the province of Malabar woman is actually in the ascendancy. This curious country of women learned in Sanskrit, and kings who rule as the regents of their sisters, will have many disclosures to make to the world when India shall have produced a sufficient number of competent sociologists of her own blood. It is commonly said to be characteristically polyandrous, but it is not so in the same sense as Tibet and some of the Himalayan tribes, for no woman regards herself as the wife of 2 men at once. The term matriarchal is more accurate, inasmuch as the husband visits the wife in her own home, and the right of inheritance is through the mother. Thus, far from India's being the land of the uniform oppression of women by a uniform method, it represents the whole cycle of feminist institutions. There is literally no theory of feminine rights and position that does not find illustration somewhere within her boundaries. With regard to the seclusion of women by Hindus, The statement that it arose as a protection against the violence of a ruling race is thoughtless and untrue. The custom in its present vigor dates undoubtedly from the period of Muslim rule. Where that rule was firm and long established, it has sunk deep into Hindu habit, and in Bombay and Madras, under opposite conditions, has been almost passed by. In the plays of Kalidas, and in old Sanskrit literature generally, there is abundant evidence that it was not practiced in its modern form in the Vedic, Buddhistic, or Puranic periods. But although it dates from the era of Ghazni or Ghor, except where the Rajput made an independent introduction of the purdah, there is nothing to show that the cloistering of women was spread in Hindustan by other means than by force of fashion and imperial prestige. Indeed, sooner or later we have to face the question, what induced the Mohammedan to screen his women? Islam derives the religious sanction of its social institutions from Arabia, and the Arab woman is said to enjoy considerable freedom and power. Hence it is sometimes claimed that the Mussulman himself adopted the practice from Persia, from China, or from Greece. Such explanations are little more than recrimination. What are we to regard as the root of a convention which in certain parts of the Orient appears to be almost instinctive? Climate, inducing scantiness of clothing, cannot be the whole secret, for in that case Madras would be more deeply permeated by the custom than Bengal, whereas the very opposite is the fact. Might we not as well reverse the inquiry and try to assign some reason for the Western assumption of equality between man and woman? The first point that strikes us is the very uneven distribution of the theory in Europe itself. It is by no means so strong in Latin as in Teutonic countries, nor so clearly formulated amongst the Germanic peoples as in the Norse sagas. This fact lends color to the theory of modern sociologists that fisher life is the source of all equality between the sexes, for the man pursuing the conquest of the sea must leave his wife regnant over the affairs of field and farm. It is supposed by some that the very use of the wedding ring originated in this investiture of women at marriage, by means of the signet ring, with a fullness of authority similar to the husband's outside, over all that lay within the house. Surely it is clear that land and sea are not the only possible antitheses, but that wherever a race is employed in a sustained and arduous conquest of nature, there it will tend towards fullness of cooperation, similarity of manners, and equality of rights between men and women, and that, other things being equal, under long settled conditions, from which anxiety is largely eliminated, there is a progressive inclination towards divergence of their lines of activity, accompanied by the more complete surrender of women to the protection of man, and the seeking of her individuality in the sphere of morals and emotion. The tendency to divergence of function would be accelerated in Asia by the nature of the climate, which makes stillness and passivity the highest luxury. This fact would combine again with military prepossessions, to make the custom of seclusion especially characteristic of royal households, and having once achieved such social prestige, it would speedily extend over wide areas. Thus it becomes characteristic of conquering races, and among Hindus is imitated with marked energy by Bengal, which is not only the most idealistic of all the Indian provinces, but also, owing to the existence of the Zamindar class, the most persistently feudal after Rajputana. If this theory be correct, the freedom of the Indian woman of the first Aryan period is to be explained as the outcome of the struggle with earth and forest. The early immigrations of agricultural races across the Himalayas from Central Asia must have meant a combat with nature of the severest kind. It was a combat in which the wife was the helpmeet of the husband. If he cleared the jungle and hunted the game, she had to give aid in the field and garden. The Aryan population was scanty, and she would often be required to take his place. Vicissitudes were many. At a moment's notice, she must be prepared to meet an emergency, brave, cheerful, and self-helpful. In such a life, woman must move as easily as man. It began to be otherwise, however, when the country was cleared, agriculture established on the Aryan scale, and the energy of the race concentrated on the higher problem of conserving and extending its culture of mind and spirit. It is doubtful whether Indian philosophy could ever have been completed on other terms than on those of some measure of seclusion for women. The world is but a dream. God alone is real. Such an ultimatum could hardly have been reached in a society like that of Judaism, where love and beauty were held as the seal of divine approval on a successful life. Not that India would decry these happy gifts, but they are secular joys in her eyes, not spiritual. The religion of the woman lies in serving her husband. The religion of the widow lies in serving God, say the women, and there is no doubt in their minds that the widow's call is the higher of the two. While we talk of the seclusion of women, however, as if it were a fact, we must be careful to guard against misconception. In society and in the streets of Indian cities, it is practically true that we see men alone. This fact makes it a possibility for the religious to pass his life without looking on the face of any woman save such as he may call mother. Inside the house, if we penetrate so far, we shall probably meet with none but women. But if we live there day after day, we shall find that every woman has familiar intercourse with some man or men in the family. The relation between brothers and sisters-in-law is all gaiety and sweetness. Scarcely any children are so near to a woman as the sons of her husband's sisters. It is the proud prerogative of these, whatever be their age, to regard her as their slave. There is a special delicacy of affection and respect between the husband's father and his daughter-in-law. Cousins count as brothers and sisters, and from the fact that every woman has her rightful place in some family, it follows that there is more healthy human intercourse with men in almost every Hindu woman's life than in those of thousands of single women living alone or following professional careers in the suburbs of London or other Western cities. It is an intercourse, too, that is full of a refined and delicate sense of humor. Indian men who have been to Europe always declare that the Zenana woman stands unrivaled in her power of the repartee. English fun is apt to strike the Eastern ear as a little loud. How charming is the Bengali version of "the bad penny will always turn up" in "I am the broken cowrie that has been to 7 markets." That is to say, I may be worthless, but I am knowing. We are too apt to define the ideal as that towards which we aspire, thinking but rarely of those assimilated ideals which reveal themselves as custom. If we analyze the conventions that dominate an Indian woman's life, we cannot fail to come upon an exceedingly stern canon of self-control. The closeness and intimacy of family life, and the number of interests that have to be considered, make strict discipline necessary, doubtless, for the sake of peace. Hence, a husband and wife may not address each other in the presence of others. A wife may not name her husband, much less praise him, and so on. Only little children are perfectly untrammeled, and may bestow their affection when and where they will. All these things are for the protection of the community, lest it be outraged by the parading of a relationship of intimacy, or victimized by an enthusiasm which it could not be expected to share. This constant and happy subordination of oneself to others does not strike the observer, only because it is so complete. It is not the characteristic of the specially developed individual alone, for it is recognized and required in all degrees of delicacy by society at large. Unselfishness and the thirst for service stand out in the Western personality against a background of individualistic conventions, and convey an impression of eagerness and struggle of pity, without which the world would certainly be the poorer. But the Eastern woman is unaware of any defiance of institutions. She is the product of an ethical civilization. Her charities are required of her. Her vows and penances are unknown even to her husband, but were they told, they would scarcely excite remark in a community where all make similar sacrifices. This is only to say that she is more deeply self-effacing and more effectively altruistic than any Western. The duty of tending the sick is so much a matter of course to her that she does not dream of it as a special function, for which one might erect hospitals or learn nursing. Here, no doubt, she misses a great deal, for the modern organization of skill has produced a concentration of attention on method that avails to save much suffering. Still, we must not too carelessly assume that our own habit of massing together all the hungry, sick, and insane, and isolating them in worlds visited throughout with like afflictions to their own, is the product of a higher benevolence on our part. Throughout the world, women are the guardians of humanity's ethical ideals. The boy would not be so anxious to carry the dead to the burning gate if his mother had not filled his babyhood with admiration of the deed. The husband would not be so strenuous to return home at his best if his wife did not understand and appreciate his noblest qualities. But even beyond this, women give themselves as the perpetual illustration of the ideals. The words, "He that will be chief among you, let him be your servant," fall on Western ears with a certain sense of sublime paradox, but the august speaker uttered the merest truism of that simple Eastern world in which he moved. he roused no thrill of surprise in the minds of his hearers, for to each his own mother was chief and yet servant of all. Those who, knowing the East, read the list of the 7 corporal works of mercy, may well start to imagine themselves back in the Hindu home, watching its laborious, pious women as they move about their daily tasks, never questioning the first necessity of feeding the hungry, harboring the harborless, and the like. Truly, the East is eternally the mother of religions, for the reason that she has assimilated as ordinary social functions what the West holds to be only the duty of officialism or the message of the Church, and to those who deeply understand it may well seem that Christianity in Europe is neither more nor less than the mission of the Asiatic life. End of chapter 5.